بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So, normally we cover this book here, Purification of the Soul. But today I want to do something a little bit different because it is February 14th. And February 14th is Valentine's Day, and this is what everyone's talking about, right, today. And so I don't want to talk about Valentine's Day. I don't want to talk about Valentine's Day from the perspective of whether or not we should celebrate it. And I want to talk about Valentine's Day from the perspective of it being, commercialized and all that. But what I want to talk about is actually the something deeper, which is related to Valentine's Day, and that's the concept of love. I want to talk about, what is love? What are different types of love? And how is it that we should love? And how is it that we should not love? So to begin with, I think that what happens, the reason why love is something that's such a strong, powerful motivator. It's such a strong, powerful force. And if you think about the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the human being was given a heart, right? And the purpose of that heart, there's one purpose of that heart, and that is to love. And that is to love, ultimately. But the question is, to love what? To love what was that heart created? So we were given the capacity to love. We were given the heart to love. What was it intended and created to love? It was intended and created to love the creator of the heart, the creator of love. It was intended and created to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have this part inside of us that we have the need to give. It's like this giant mass internally. And I think that basically we can stumble in one of two ways. One is that we don't ever give it, and it just stays in there, right? This is a person who doesn't give love at all to anybody or to anything. And that is almost like it creates like this empty vacuum inside, and that's very detrimental. It's almost like it makes a person implode, because you are made to give this. You have been given this love in order to give it. So you have been given in order to give. It wasn't given to you so you could just hold on to it. And when you just hold on to it and you don't give it, it kills you inside, and it creates this very painful emptiness. And then the second way that we stumble is that when we do give it, but we give it to the wrong things. So we have this giant mass we talked about, right? This immense capacity to love, and this immense capacity of devotion, of loyalty, of worship. I mean, really, really, we have this as human beings, the capacity to be utterly devoted to something. But the problem is we give it to the wrong places. We give it to the wrong things. And that's where we also stumble. Because when you give this mass, this thing inside of us, this love, this devotion to something that other than where it was meant to be, it causes almost this unparalleled damage internally, like just destruction, this pain internally. It's just like, taking a machete and just cutting up inside. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the universe, and he says that had there been another ilah other than him, had there been another object of worship, had there been another Lord other than him, then the entire universe would have been corrupted. لَفَسِدَتْهَا. The entire universe would have been corrupted. So let me ask you this. If the entire universe would have been corrupted, if there had been another ilah other than him, what do you think happens inside the human heart when there's another ilah other than him? When there's another Lord other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart, in the human heart, what do you think happens? That corruption that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the universe, and imagine something so, intense as the universe. So like awesome. The human heart, imagine the damage that happens when you put a rival with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that heart. When you love something else as you should only love Allah. When you love something else more than you should love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It causes unparalleled damage, destruction, and corruption in the heart. This is the problem that we face, because so many of us do this. So many of us fall into this. We need to love. We need to love. It's human to love. Allah has created us to love. But the problem is we're just stumbling, blind, giving it to anything just because we need to. So usually, and I'm going to just take a couple examples, there are different objects, there are different places that we try to put this love. To begin with, one of the very common places, as we live in a capitalistic society, very materialistic society, is in money, in things, having things, in material things. I put this love and this attachment in having more things, having, nicer cars, bigger houses, more up-to-date technology, more money, more status. This is where my attachment is. And a friend of mine told me that one time she visited this conference, which was, sometimes they make these seminars for how to be a millionaire, right? Like how to get rich. And it's very interesting. She was telling me how, she said it was very disturbing but fascinating at the same time to see these people and how attached they were to money. How money was, to them, money was going to cure all of their problems. Money was really like what was going to fill all. And she said these people were actually like I guess they were talking about, I'm not sure if they were talking about they were somehow talking about their attachment to money or their childhood, and they were like, she said people were in tears. Like this is how serious it is. This money has become that Lord that they have in their heart. And so you see the corruption and that it causes in the human heart. But then and this is what's sometimes more subtle. We are supposed to love people, right? Right? I mean, we're supposed to love our spouses, we're supposed to love our children, we're supposed to love our parents, we're supposed to love our families. So then how does this fit in? Because we're supposed to love these people, but we're supposed to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a different way. And we're supposed to love His messenger in a different way, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So how do you reconcile? How do you do that? Well, the same thing that happens to the one who makes money a rival in their heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happens to the one who makes another person a rival in their heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when you take another person and you love them as you should only love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it creates that same destruction internally, that same really unparalleled anguish. It's torment, it's inner torment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us of this in the Quran, and He says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا تدعوا مع الله إلها آخر. So there are a number of times when Allah is warning us from calling on another ilah other than Him. But calling on another ilah other than Him does not just mean making dua to someone other than Allah in the sense of, like prayer. But calling on another ilah other than Allah has many different shades of meaning. When you are turning to something other than Allah in complete and utter love, when you are giving that part inside of you, that mass, that, remember we said that everyone has this mass that they need to give. When you give that to something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's as if you're making that thing an ilah. So it's like you're calling on an ilah other than Him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say in that ayah that He's warning us not to do that, because if we do that, He says that person will be among the tormented. That person will be among the tormented. So you can understand this ayah in the most obvious way is that whenever you commit shirk, you are going to be tormented in the hereafter, right? This is of course true. But it's not only in the hereafter. And it's not only major shirk, it's not only praying to someone other than Allah. Any form of shirk causes internal torment even in this life. Any form of shirk causes internal torment even in this life before the next. This is a very, very, a statement really to ponder on. Because when I say any form of shirk, I mean shirk in fear, I mean shirk in love, I mean shirk in hope, I mean shirk in trust, shirk in anything. Anytime I give what should only be given to Allah to other than Him, it causes internal torment. The torture of it is proportional to how much shirk is there. You feel me? The more shirk is there, the more I suffer internally. The more I love something, it's like, the stronger the attachment, the stronger the dependency, the more crazy I am about this thing, the more I worship it, the more it's going to make me suffer, right? And this is something that's like, it's like a known thing, right? And people tell you things like love hurts, right? And like all these different, these concepts about love. Well, let's think about that for a second. Is love really supposed to hurt? This is something I want us to think about. Is love really supposed to hurt so much? And what I want to say is this. When Allah talks about love between spouses, the type of love, the way it's supposed to be, it's a very different sense than the sense we get of, from movies and, novels and the tragedies, right, that we read about and we hear about, and the torment that comes as a result of being in love. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about love in the Quran, He says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم من سورة الروم ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة. Look at how Allah describes this relationship. He says, and from among His signs is this, that He created from you spouses. خلق بينكم, he said ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواج لتسكنوا إليها. So He made from you spouses. لتسكنوا إليها. He said that you may dwell in tranquility with them. Sukun is the complete opposite of this, right? This craziness, this feeling of torment, this almost being like a drug addict. Yeah, see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He describes love, He's not describing a drug addict. But when we look at the way that people love and what it causes and how crazy it makes a person and how much pain it causes a person, you know for sure there's a problem. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That is a sign that person has loved in the wrong way, that person has given that love to the wrong place, that there's a rivalry in the heart, and whenever there's a rival, that person has called on an ilah other than Allah in their love, because you see the torment. Now let me just clarify. When we lose a loved one, are we going to feel sad? Yes, we're going to feel sad. That's human nature. If we didn't feel sad, then we wouldn't be human, we'd be robots. Did the Prophet ﷺ feel sad when he lost his son and he lost his grandson? Yes, he did. Because he was a human being, and that's part of rahmah, he said. He even cried. But the pain that the Prophet ﷺ felt when he lost his son, or he lost Khadija, radiallahu anha, sadness, year of sadness. He lost his uncle, he lost his wife. That pain is normal. That pain is a part of mercy that you feel. But I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the absolute devastation to the extent of paralysis. I'm talking about being paralyzed by the pain, that you don't even want to go on with life, that you don't even want to get out of bed, that you don't have anything else to live for. that you can't think of anything else, that you can't eat, that you can't sleep, that you are absolutely devastated. That's not what we're, that's not the way that the Prophet ﷺ respond. He didn't give up his mission when he lost Khadija radiallahu anha. He kept going. Yes, he felt sadness. Yes, he cried when he lost his son and his grandson, but he did not become debilitated by it. He didn't become paralyzed. But when we lose something that we made into a rival with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it does cause that. And it causes not just sadness. And I will tell you, because I know from experience, that there is a difference between sadness when something is taken from you that you had a healthy attachment to, and the pain and absolute torment that you feel when something you had an unhealthy attachment to is taken from you. They're completely different. So no one is saying, yeah, you don't feel sadness. This is not what it means. It means that inner torment that we see in these images of love, being in love, the person is crazy. The person will give up anything. The person can't think of anything else. The person would do anything to be with this person. That is not the way love is supposed to be. That is not healthy love. That's more like an addiction. That's more like a drug addict. Unfortunately, we get addicted to a lot of things in this life. We get addicted to more than just drugs. Addictions, I have a friend who, she's actually a counselor, and she works on addictions. And she says she doesn't call herself, like an addiction counselor. She calls herself an attachments counselor. Basically that it's basically just about unhealthy attachments. Some people have their unhealthy attachments to drugs. Some people have their unhealthy attachments to alcohol. Some people have their unhealthy attachments to people. It's still the same. It's still sort of filling that same void, filling that same need in an unhealthy way. One of the most awesome examples I've found in describing, well, gosh, there's so many, if in popular culture, in songs, in novels and movies and stuff, you find so many examples of what love, what it shouldn't look like, right? Right? Okay, this is a very good example of, making something an ilah other than Allah, okay? And one example, well, you see it in the story of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, you see this, when the other person is dead, or they think the other person is dead, they want to kill themselves. There's no more reason to exist, and it's a very exaggerated example of what we're talking about. But there's stuff in even there's a song. There's a lot of different types of lyrics, but everything I do it for you. Okay, that concept of I live and I die for you. Everything that I do, it's with you in mind. What is that? What is that? If every single thing you do is for this thing, if every single thing you do, if you would live for that person and die for that person and steal for that person and kill for that person and lie for that person, well, you know what? That's called worship. That's not love. That's worship. That's slavery. And who are we slaves to? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be an ilah. Not anything else or anyone else. But there's this line in Great Expectations. Has anyone, you guys all read it probably in high school, right? And the story in Great Expectations, right, is this this woman, this old lady, she's got her heart broken because she was supposed to get married to this guy, and he left her on her wedding day or something. So she's bitter. Now this is a perfect example of of an attachment, right? She was devastated by what happened, and as a result, look at how obsessed she was, that she raised her daughter in such a way to train her to do that to other men. to like basically break the hearts of other men. So she was raised in order to do this to Pip. So in one of the parts in the book, she explains what is, she says this, I'll tell you what real love is. And she goes on and she explains, and she says in quotation, real love is utter, it's something like utter devotion, complete submission, giving your whole self to another person who basically just, just doesn't even value what you've given them, right? So she has this whole long quote, and it's so interesting to look at how she describes it, because what she's describing is not real love. What she's describing is worship. She's describing what happens when you give your love to the wrong things, when you put it in the wrong place. So now I want to get into, we talked about, so what we're talking about right now is the wrong kind of love, the where you, what happens when you put your love in the wrong place, or that type of love in the wrong place. So then the question is, well, what is the right kind of love? How is it, what is the healthy kind of love, and how do we love without it being like that? You know how on the Day of Judgment there's we're told that there is no shade except for the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we're told that there are groups of people who will be in that shade when there's no other shade. Now, among those people is one group where we're told that they are those who love for the sake of Allah. They love for the sake of Allah. They come together for the sake of Allah, and they part for the sake of Allah. Now, this group of people, imagine how important this is, how intense that would be, that it would make you among the 7 who are shaded in the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when there's no other shade. So what does it mean then to love for the sake of Allah? What does that mean? Loving for the sake of Allah, to think about loving for the sake of Allah, it's basically that your heart is completely full with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that your greatest love is for Him, and everything else that you love is because of that love for Allah. It's for that love. It's as a result of that love. So everything that I love, when I love for the sake of Allah, it's either because Allah told me to love that thing, or because loving that thing brings me closer to Allah, or because Allah loves that thing, or because that thing loves Allah. You see, everything is about, what's the common denominator? Allah. That's love for the sake of Allah. I don't love anymore for the sake of myself, but I love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if I am loving, for example, my children, even people who don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love their children. Is that love for the sake of Allah? No, because they don't even believe in Allah. But as a believer, I can love my children for the sake of Allah. That my love for them and my giving to them can be for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I know that my reward comes from Him. That's love for the sake of Allah. So I could be doing the same exact thing that another mother is doing, but it's completely different. Even though on the outside it looks the same. I'm taking care of my kids, she's taking care of her kids, right? I'm taking care of my home, she's taking care of her home. You know, everybody is, but one person is doing it intending their reward from Allah. The other one is doing it because they're wanting the reward from the person themselves. So that actually, what ends up happening with that is it puts you in a very vulnerable situation. When you love for the sake of your own self, and for the sake of that person instead of for the sake of Allah, now you get into the problem of, okay, if I love you, that means I need you to give me. I need you to fill me. And what happens when you don't? What happens when you either, don't, suppose someone just leaves, gets sick, dies, doesn't, breaks up with you, doesn't love you, is tired, I mean, whatever. Nobody can consistently give, right? No human being can. So that's why you're always very vulnerable. You go up and down, up and down. When they give to you, you're full, you're happy. When they're mean to you, you're hurt. But the thing is, and even if you're dependent on getting appreciation from a person, this happens a lot with kids. It happens a lot with spouses, that you will do so much for that person, right? Especially, women, they tend to be very giving, You know, generally we, will give so much to our kids, give so much to our husbands, right? And sometimes we don't feel appreciated. We don't feel like it's even being noticed, or maybe it's not being thanked, or it's not being, reciprocated. And that's very hurtful, But if you think about, imagine if you were giving all of that, you were giving to your kids, giving to your spouse, and you were doing it waiting for your reward not from them, waiting for your appreciation not from them, waiting for the even acknowledgement not from them, but from Allah. And if you look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes himself, among his attributes is, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he's ash-shakur. And one of the things, what do we want from people when we do something for them? We want appreciation, we want thanks. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's one of his attributes, is that he gives that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he acknowledges and knows, and he rewards, and he notices what you're doing, and he will reward you for it. He will reward you for it. So when we do these things and we feel like we're not getting anything back, we are. But the problem is, where are we expecting it from? Yeah? If we expect it from Allah, he will never fail us. He never fails in paying back, in giving. It's like the person who, when you go to work every single day, imagine if you go to work every single day and you think that every day is payday. You go to work and you're waiting for your check at the end of the day, but it's not payday. Payday is at the end of the month, right? So if you go to work thinking that it's payday, what happens at the end of your day when you don't get your check? You get very disappointed. But if you knew, okay, today's not payday, tomorrow's not payday, but I'm going to get paid, then you would be patient. And this is exactly the concept, that everything we do, we may not get the appreciation today. We may not get the reward, today. But Allah is going to pay us on payday. What's payday? In the hereafter. We know that there will be a payday, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never fails. Never fails to Allah says that He will never lose. Nothing that we do will get lost with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No action, if it's done correctly and for His sake, will ever be lost. So it's not like any, penny slips between the cracks. We get every single penny. And in fact, we don't just get what we deserve, ever. We get much more. Allah says that He rewards us based on the best of what we used to do. The best of what we used to do, and then He multiplies it. He gives us so much more. But when He holds us accountable, it's not in the same way. He doesn't multiply. He gives us just exactly what is just. But when in His reward, He multiplies and He gives. So, changing our mindset in what we expect and from where we expect can absolutely change how we experience this whole life, experience everything. If what we do is for the sake of Allah, so that means loving through Allah, loving for Allah. It's like, I love you because you love Allah. I love you because you bring me closer to Allah. I love you because Allah told me to love you. I love you because you remind me of Allah. Like, again, that is what it means to love for the sake of Allah. That it isn't about you, and it really isn't about me. It's about Him. The more that we can have that in our relationships, the more peaceful the relationship, the more of that sukoon that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, more tranquility there will be in that relationship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. These spouses are intended to be لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, for you to have tranquility there, right? That tranquility will come as a result of loving for the sake of Allah. And you see that even if you're not married, you see that in even your friendships. Those friendships, and we've all had experiences where we had friendships that were not for the sake of Allah, and we had friendships that were. And they're not the same. They are not the same. The friendships that are not for the sake of Allah, it's just nothing but drama. Am I right? It's just drama after drama after drama. It's he said, she said, you called me, you didn't call me, you didn't, it's just a headache. It's painful. And it actually causes a lot of hurt. I remember like growing up, I mean, those types of friendships just caused me so much pain because you get attached to these people and then they hurt you. And then it's like, how could you say this about me? How could you do this? How could, like, and then you get like upset because they're like, now they're like friends with someone else and they're ignoring you. And it's just, subhanAllah, it's just not stable. It's not healthy, and it doesn't feel good, right? It's just, there's something about it that there's no peace there. There's no tranquility there. Now compare that to your other relationships that were for the sake of Allah. The friendships, now I'm just talking about friendships. How different are those? You don't have the drama. You don't have the he said, she said. It's not causing you pain. You're not up at night crying. You're not fighting. You're just, it's really like a blessing. Yeah, you guys understand what I'm saying? It's really a blessing because that is the way we were supposed to love each other, in that way. And when the closer we can get to that, the closer we can get to that sukoon that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about. Okay, so the first question is about selfless love and like how a lot of times you hear like that a relationship would be healthier if you can have selfless love, but then that kind of means if it's, we were talking about how if it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the other concept, if Allah is taken out of the picture and we talk about selfless love, it basically ends up being about the other person, right? And I think that, subhanAllah, even when you think about that, okay, suppose you took Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the picture and we're just talking about selfless love in quotation marks, where it's just all about the other person. But you have to ask a question. Where are you filling up from? Like, what's filling you? Because if you're giving, like, that's the point, is if you're giving and giving and giving and you're not filling up, it's kind of like, you use the car, eventually you need to fill up with gas. Where are you getting your gas? And I think that what ends up happening, and you find this in relationship books, and you find that what happens is when you have this, sometimes it often tends to be the mother or tends to be the wife or whatever, the woman, she's like kind of like just her whole life she kind of was self-sacrificing, right? And always just giving, giving, giving. But eventually she gets to a point where she's just like done, where it's just like you've emptied yourself out. So what's happening is you're taking from somewhere and you're emptying, you're giving, but you end up at a point where now you feel empty. And that happens. And the difference is that when it's love for the sake of Allah, when it's about Allah, Allah is the one filling you. In fact, Allah is the source. And Allah's source never ends. Allah's source never diminishes. So when you have Allah as the source, you can actually keep giving and not get emptied. And that's the difference, I think. So it is unselfish love, and it is about the other person, but it's ultimately, it's not, the other person receives the love, true, but it's not for their sake necessarily. It's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately, and also Allah is the source. So it's, subhanAllah, it's such a beautiful way to love, because you can give, like, think about the way that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved. Think about the way his compassion, the way he was with the people, with his wife, or with his companions. Like, it's not that he wasn't, I mean, he was full of love. He gave so much, and he has so much compassion. So it isn't that, loving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mean that you give less to people. In fact, you can give more. And sometimes people get confused when you talk about, not being attached to people. So then people think, oh, you're going to be like a rock, right? You're not going to be loving, or you're not going to be affectionate, or you're not going to be compassionate. And it's the opposite. If your source is if your source does not diminish, in fact, you can give more to people, as the Prophet ﷺ did, because his source was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it was love for the sake of Allah. So I hope that makes sense, inshallah, that I know you get that a lot. The concept of like, people just, it's something so foreign of like, not being dependent on people. It makes people start to think, well, then you're going to be like, um, as if there's two extremes. Either you're very dependent on people, or you're like, this uncaring, heartless person. But no, that in fact, the one who gives so much, and it's not for the sake of Allah, it actually ends up being either you empty yourself, or you hurt yourself, or you hurt the other person. It's not the healthy type of love. So other questions, or even just stuff that you're thinking about, reflections on what we said. Okay, how do you prevent? Okay, so the question is, how do you prevent loving without having it be unhealthy, or an unhealthy attachment to that person or that thing that you love? I think that the best way is to have the correct focus. I think the reason why we get unhealthy attachments is because of where our focus is. The more you focus on something, the more attached you become to it. So if we're focused on Allah, then our strongest attachment is going to be to Him. But if we're focused on another person, our strongest attachment is going to be to that other person. Even if we believe in Allah, but we're not really focused on Him. We're focused on this person. If we're very focused on money, making money, my focus is my career, and getting up the ladder, and that's my focus. Even though maybe I believe in Allah, I say I love Allah, but I don't really think about it much. So that's what I think the problem is. What do we spend most of our time thinking about? What do we spend most of our time striving for? What do we spend most of our time basically looking at? And when I say looking, I don't just mean with the eyes. I mean looking at in our hearts. What are we really focused? What is our heart focused on? What are our thoughts focused on? Chances are it's something other than Allah. And that's why we get attached to those things. If we were to just refocus instead on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that we throw ourselves into His remembrance more, and we increase that other thing will become smaller and smaller in our eyes by comparison. Yeah? Like, you may be just totally in love and enamored by a toy car. And when you're a kid, that's the way you are. And you're just like, you can't even get your eyes off of it. But then you grow up, and all of a sudden your eyes shift and you see a real car. Yeah? That toy Ferrari means nothing to you anymore. You see? I mean, you don't necessarily hate that, car now. That's the toy car. You don't necessarily throw it away. But in comparison to this real car, it doesn't become hard to detach. Same thing with this life. When you compare this life to the next life, it's not hard to detach. It's not hard to, because you're seeing something so much better. You're basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, here's dunya and here's akhirah. Which one would you choose? Yeah, when you look at it that way, how could you get attached to dunya? When Allah is telling you, okay, here's dunya, which is like, you have to feel pain, you have to bleed, you have to die, you have to get sick, you have to lose people. This dunya, there's no way to avoid it. And then you have akhirah, and He describes akhirah, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. There's no fear, and there's no sadness. Yeah, what causes us most harm and pain in this life? Some form of fear, some form of sadness. Allah is telling us, here you got this, and you got this. You got this where you feel no fear, no sadness. خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. It is better, and it is more lasting. Meaning it's perfect, it doesn't have all the deficiencies of dunya, and guess what? It never ends. خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. It's more lasting. So you know Allah, that's how Allah showed us. It shows us. He shows us this. He shows us this, and you make the choice. It doesn't become hard once you see the alternative. So that's why I'm saying that's why I'm saying when we get very attached to things, it's because we don't see Allah. When we get very attached to dunya, it's because we don't see akhirah. Because there's no way that you're going to be in love with a toy car if you saw the real thing. This doesn't happen. So that's what it is. Our hearts don't see Allah. Our hearts don't see akhirah. That's why we're in love with this life. That's why we can become totally obsessed with things of this life and people in this life. So the answer really is like, you want it to be easy, you don't have to pull it out, just see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just see what you're comparing here. See akhirah. Then you don't have to, if this kid never saw a real car, it'd be really hard to snatch the toy car away from him. Right? Because when he's if all he sees is that toy car, and then you try to take it away and say, hey, detach, dude, detach, and you try to pull it away, they're going to scream and shout and, be so much in pain. But if you just shift that kid's focus and say, hey, check this out, look at this, this is a real car, this is a real Ferrari. What? And now you take that car and it's fine. It's not painful anymore. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what we have to understand. Like, Allah says in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى. You prefer this life when the hereafter is better and more lasting. It's a question. Like, how is it that you prefer this life when the hereafter is better and more lasting? It's just on our part, it's just a lack of sight. It's a lack of understanding. Oh, okay. So the question is, she's asking, she's referring to a story I wrote about in an article called Escaping the Worst Prison. And it's a story about a girl and a guy. And like basically it's a story about this girl who becomes totally consumed with this guy. And it was to the point of it just becomes an obsession. It's almost like, just like an addiction. Or like worship. And so she's saying, well, how is that if somebody's religious? How could that happen? And just because somebody is, and this is why I'm talking about focus of heart, because somebody could be praying. They are praying. Their forehead is down to the ground, but their heart is not there. Their heart is somewhere else. So I could be praying, standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but my heart is in the hands of something else. My heart is given to something else. Some person, some money, some degree, some career, whatever it is. That's the problem. We need to bring our hearts back. We need to bring our hearts back to witness Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to see Him. Right, khushu'a is that concept of focus and humility in salah. And that is the reason that, the way to have khushu'a is that when the heart is focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just the actions, right? And that's the thing. I really, if you want, everything, what we're saying here, if you want practical, like something practical to-do list, how do I detach from this thing that is, other than Allah, or how, to-do list is, you need to increase your dhikr. Very simple. You need to increase your remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you cannot stick to that, every time you move away from the remembrance of Allah, that's how come you fall into this again and again, these distractions. Because As soon, again, it's like this person, they see the toy car, they're obsessed with the toy car, they shift, they see the real car, all of a sudden now they want the real car. But what happens when they get distracted? Amnesia happens, that they look back at the toy car, they forget that the real one even exists. We human beings, the word insan comes from the root word which means to forget. We are like that. We forget so easily. We could see the real car today, forget about it tomorrow. Forget that we even saw it. And now we're back at the toy car. This is the way we are. So this is the problem. We need consistent and regular and a lot of dhikr. And the first and best way, the first thing is the salah, is your 5 daily prayers. On time, you get those straight, and that's the first thing you have to make sure is solid. And then you add to that regular Quran that you're regularly reading and thinking about and understanding, not just reading to read, not just reading to get through it, but really thinking about it and really understanding what is it saying to me, because the Quran applies to every single one of you. It applies to all people at all times. So don't think the Quran is about people, of the stories of old people. When you read those stories, know that they have a lesson for you today. They have a lesson for what you're going through today. So really staying connected to that. And then your adhkar, remembrance, like the supplications that you make in the morning, in the evening, after salah, before you sleep. You need to just increase in your remembrance of Allah, and you will find that naturally the focus will become corrected. As soon as you slacken in the remembrance, you're going to go back. That's the way we are. That's the way the heart is. The heart needs to constantly be brought back. So you cannot let go of this remembrance. And this is something also that's important, like these types of study circles, they need to be regular. That you need to be regularly remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not just once a week, but at least once a week halaqah, but not just that. I mean, again, I give this example. You're not ever going to say, I'm only needing to eat once a week. We need to feed our bodies 3 times a day, at least. We need to feed our soul and our heart too. Because the heart also dies. The heart also dies. The heart also gets sick, just like the body. If you put poison in your body, guess what happens? It gets sick and it dies. If you suffocate the body, if you don't breathe, if you don't take food, you die. The body dies. The heart is the same way. The heart needs air. The heart needs food. And the air and the food of the heart is the remembrance of Allah. When you stop taking that, or you kind of like stop for a while, you're suffocating the heart. You need it to be consistent in order for the heart to stay alive. And I just want to throw this out there. There are certain poisons that we put into our hearts. This is the thing, subhanAllah, we take better care of our bodies than we do our hearts. We take better care of our bodies than we do our hearts. Nobody who cares about their body is going to regularly sip on poison. Am I right? Am I right? Unless you're trying to kill yourself. You're not going to regularly sip on poison. And yet we regularly sip on poison of the heart. We do. One of the poisons of the heart is bad company. When we sit and we have like acquaintance, when our company is bad, when our company is not reminding us of Allah, we are taking poison. And we're doing it willingly. Let me just take a sip of that. Let me take a sip of that every time, every day. What's going to happen? Your heart's going to become sick. And eventually the heart dies. You have to be very, very careful. Just like you would never ingest poison into your body. And yet you ingest poison into your heart. When you are with those people, when you're with company that does not remind you of Allah and takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're poisoning your heart. This is so serious. And other poisons that we put into our heart have to do with what we look at, what we listen to, what we speak about. These are all openings to the heart. When we're sitting and backbiting, when we're sitting and talking about garbage, that's all poison in the heart. When we're looking at something haram, that's all poison in the heart. When we're listening to something haram, That's all poison in the heart. So we are constantly poisoning our own hearts. And on top of it, suffocating the heart, not remembering Allah. So imagine, why do we wonder where we are? Why do we wonder that we don't feel close to Allah? Why do we wonder, hey, my heart, it feels really, dead. It feels really hard. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise. Because what if we did that to our bodies? We didn't eat, we didn't breathe, and then we sipped poison daily. Well, what's going to happen? You guys get what I'm saying? So when we don't remember Allah, we're not eating and we're not breathing. And when we are with this, bad company, or we're talking about garbage, looking at garbage, hearing garbage, we're sipping that poison. Yeah. The example of taking the heart, or taking the remembrance of Allah away from the heart, is like taking a fish out of water. That's the statement of the scholars, subhanallah, rahmatullah alayhim. Other questions? Or okay. قولي قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.